Hello and welcome to today's PIR live event brought to you by Partners in Research Canada. My name is Stacey Joyce and I will be your host. Please remember that if you're joining us live, you can ask questions anytime throughout the webinar by going to the top left-hand corner of your window and clicking on chat. Make sure you change the to field so that it reads either everyone or it includes attendees. And then be sure to include your name or the teacher's name, school name, city, something so that we can give you a shout out when we ask your question. So today's guest is Dr. Jennifer Foote. She is an associate professor of biology at Algoma University. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Foote. Please take it away when you're ready.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming today to listen to me. So I bet you're wondering where Algoma University is. I'm going to show you a photo of where we find Algoma. So here's Algoma University. This is the front of our university in winter. We get lots of snow in Sault Ste. Marie, sometimes up to 4 meters in a winter. And Sault Ste. Marie is found right here where the A is on the map, right at the bottom of Lake Superior and at the beginning of Lake Huron. So if you're in southern Ontario, we're way up in what you would call the north. Okay. So what I'm here to talk to you about today is what I do for research. And have you ever wondered why birds make sounds? So why do they call or sing? Well, that is what I studied. So like other animals, the sounds of birds are important for their survival and reproduction. Many sounds that birds make we call calls. And calls are sounds that are relatively short and simple and convey a very clear message to others of the same species or to other species. So some birds call, for example, when a predator is nearby. And so they use something called alarm calls, which sound like this. Okay, other birds, baby birds particularly, will call in order to tell their parents that they're hungry so that the parents then bring food and deliver it to them. So we call those begging calls, and they sound like this. Okay, and then other birds make sounds to communicate where they are to other members of the same species. So birds, when they're migrating, will often call when they're flying overhead to coordinate all of their movements, which sounds. So those are Canada geese, and if you were to go outside on the playground today, you might hear Canada geese flying over as they migrate south. So these are examples of bird calls, but birds also produce other sounds called songs, which are longer, more complicated, and they use for another purpose, which is for either finding mates or defending their territory. So they use them for those two things. And what I'm interested in my research is understanding why birds sing when they do. So why do they sing at a particular time of day? And what do they sing at that particular time of day, and what does it mean? So in Canada, mostly it's just the male birds that sing, though in some cases, if you have cardinals where you live, female cardinals also sing. But in the tropical areas, both males and females often sing. So we often think of song as being only a male thing, but females can also sing as well. So lots of species sing at dawn, which is just before the sun rises. And there's lots of species singing and lots of different individuals singing at the same time. And we call this the dawn chorus. And so I want to play for you what the dawn chorus sounds like.
Dr. Foote, I just want to interrupt briefly. I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm wondering if we've missed a checkbox in sharing. The audio is quite faint. So can we try sharing again and just see if we can hear it, but it's faint. And so I want to see if we can hear it a little louder. When we get that pop-up screen for sharing, there's a checkbox at the bottom left for sharing the audio through the computer.
Oh, okay, good.
And that might be a little better.
Let's try again. Is that better?
Now it's quite loud, yes.
Okay. Okay, so that's the dawn chorus, and that's what I've been studying. And so we've learned a lot of things about the dawn chorus. For example, we have learned that the males of the same species are actually singing back and forth. And so they're involved in interactions with one another where they exchange their songs at a particular pattern. We also know that this allows them to sort out the relationships that they have between members that are on one territory and on another territory before they get started with their day, so that they can then get on with building their nests and feeding their young, or perhaps looking for food for themselves. We also know that the females are listening to the sounds at the time of day, and the type of songs that males are singing, from them they're able to tell about which male is best, so they can pick the best mate. So females are listening as well. We've also learned that the environment plays an important role in determining the songs. So what we find is that when it's really cold, or it's windy, or it's raining, the birds sing later during the dawn chorus and they sing less songs. However, when the moon is shining really bright just before the sun rises, it makes the birds think that the dawn is coming earlier. So they typically sing even earlier on days when the moon is out. And this causes a bit of problems for birds because, as you know, many of us leave lights on outside at night. So our cities are brightly lit. And so what happens is that in cities where there's lots of light pollution, birds actually start to sing earlier than they normally would if they lived in the dark. So to study the dawn chorus, I use sound recording equipment to capture the songs while it's still dark outside. So I'm going to show you some of that equipment. So here is an example of a microphone. We call this a directional microphone. I have a nice grip at the bottom that allows me to hold it relatively steady. And I point this microphone at a bird that I want to record. And because it's directional, it means that it records more in the direction that it's pointing than in all the other directions. So this gives us really nice, clear sounds when we make our recordings. I also have another type of recording. Sometimes I want to make a recording like the one I played for you, where I pick up every different species that's singing. And so to do that, I use this recorder. So this is an automated recorder, and its microphones are on the side. So there's one on this side and one on this side, and they record everything around them. So they're omnidirectional, which means they record in every direction. And they're really neat because what I can do is I can program the computer so that the recorder wakes up right before the sun rises and records for the dawn chorus and then shuts off. And it does this every day so that I only have to change the batteries about once a week. So this allows me to get out and get more than just the one dawn chorus I could get with this microphone, and get it in many different places with many of these recorders while I stay in my bed and I don't get out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning sometimes. Oh, and another thing I didn't show you is that this microphone also is digital. So it records into this recorder, and everything's written to those little tiny cards, which we call SD cards, that you put in your camera. So the same type of card that you might use in your camera. So we get all of these recordings, but then we have to figure out what to do with them. So I'm going to show you in just a minute what that looks like. But first I'm going to show you where I record my bird songs. Okay, so near Sault Ste. Marie, we have lots of great trails for hiking and skiing and biking. So in the winter, they're covered by snow, but I'm interested in looking at the dawn chorus before the snow melts. And so I have to put the recorders out with my skis and then use a ladder that I put on my backpack to go around and change the batteries. In the summertime, it's a little bit easier. This is what our trails look like. So we can walk easily through the forest and visit each of our recorders. Here's one of my students changing the batteries in the recorders. So they go out each week in the summer and they change the batteries. And then we also watch the birds. So we'll record during the daytime sometimes, and we'll watch the birds and we'll describe what they're doing in our notebooks by looking at them through our binoculars. So that's what we do in the field. But once we get all of that song data, we have to do something with it. And so instead of listening to it, we actually look at it on the computer. So we're able to make pictures of the songs that look like this. So this is what we call a bird spectrogram. And so what the computer does is it takes the time in the recording and it maps it out along the bottom of the picture. And then on the side of the picture, it takes the frequency of the sound. And so you might not know what that term means, but it's essentially a high frequency is very high and a low frequency is very low. And so it takes that and puts it onto the picture. So this would be a lower frequency sound than this one. And you can see that this bird's song has 4 different types of notes. And each one is sometimes repeated more than one time. So we can look at the songs, and every different type of sound has a different picture. So we can recognize all the species of birds in our recordings. So I'm going to show you a few species of birds that I either think might be easy to see anywhere in Canada, or might be just really interesting if you can get out and find them in the forest. So the first one is the black-capped chickadee. And I think wherever you live, from all the schools I've heard, there should be black-capped chickadees living in your neighborhood. And I'm going to show you their songs, and I'm not sure, does my mouse show up as I touch the screen? Good, so I'm going to show you where it is in the recording so you can see how the sound matches the picture, okay? Here we go, here's the black-capped chickadee. Okay, so that first one is the chickadee's song that it sings during the dawn chorus. The second one is a call that chickadees use to tell others about where food is or what type of predators are around, called the chickadee call. And it's probably the one that you're most familiar with if you've heard a chickadee. The next species is an American robin, which is also really common in cities, and one of the birds that sings really early when there's a lot of light pollution. And we say that it sounds like it's saying, cheerily, 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 cheer up. Okay, here's a red-breasted nuthatch. They're also a resident bird, which stays here all winter long, and it sounds kind of like they're honking. Here's a white-throated sparrow. This bird is common in the forests, although you'll see it in the cities at bird feeders during migration. And we say that it says, "Oh, Canada, 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 Canada." So you might be able to kind of hear where that sounds. And by making names for the way the bird's songs sound, it kind of helps us remember them. So we remember those words that we've put to the songs. This is a red-eyed vireo. We say it sounds like it's asking a question and answering it, like, here I am, where are you? Here I am. A winter wren is a bird that lives in the forest and has a really long song, and I think it sounds kind of like a sewing machine would sound. This is the ovenbird. It's one of my favorite birds that I've been studying in the forest near Sault Ste. Marie. And we like this song because it sounds like it's saying, teacher, 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 teacher. And the funny thing is that it starts out quiet and it gets louder and louder and louder, kind of like when you put your hand up and the teacher's not answering you and you get louder and louder and louder. So this bird reminds me of students. And the last one is an American woodcock. This bird displays at dawn and dusk, so just as it's getting dark at night or before it's getting light in the morning. And it makes a sound that sounds like a little beep, but then it makes a neat sound, which is the part we see here. And when you listen to it, you'll hear it. They fly up into the air and then they come down in a circle, and they actually make this sound with their feathers. It's not actually made with their beaks. So here we'll listen to this. Okay, so that's a bird you might find in a field during the spring, making that sound with its mouth, with its beak and with its tail. So that's kind of a neat example. So what do we do with our songs? We take those pictures like the ones I showed you, we view the recordings, and we count how many times each type of bird might sing, how early they start to sing, how they time their songs relative to one another, and that allows us to answer some of the questions about why birds sing. So thank you very much for listening this morning.
Thank you so much for showing us so many things, and for the audio as well. That was really helpful. I find it so curious that the American woodcock makes that sound, but not with its voice. How does it do that? Do you know?
Well, it's the way the feathers are very stiff. And so it's the way the air moves through the feathers as it spirals down that produces the sound.
Very neat. So we have our first question already from students. I had to sneak one of my own in there first to start us off. St. Patrick would love to know what a blue jay sounds like. I don't know if you have a call handy.
I don't have a call handy, but I can get one really quick.
Okay, so it's interesting because we've had a lot of blue jays in my backyard recently, and I find it, once you know what the blue jays sound like, they're very easy to pick out, I think, among the other birds.
I agree. All right, let me see. Here's my blue jay sound. Where is it? There we go. So we call that a jeer.
There, and I think we even heard that one. The blue jay is loud enough that we even heard that one without the specific sharing of your audio. We could hear it in the room. Our next question is coming from Ms. Davies' class at Roberta Bondar. It's a grade 3 class wondering, does the woodcock only make a sound with its feathers with specific wind?
No, it can make it in any amount of wind. So they like actually calm nights, because when it's calm and not windy out, sounds travel further. So they're able to get their sound to a greater distance. And so if it's a male trying to attract a mate to come and join him, she'll be able to hear it from further away. So they can do it at any wind, except that really high wind might actually make it harder for them to stay in the right position to make their sound.
Interesting. Next off, we have another question from St. Patrick, wondering if birds sing only for communication, or do they also sing for pleasure?
Well, that's something that it's really hard to tease apart. So I suspect that birds actually do enjoy singing, but they do it for a particular function. So they're doing it to either attract a mate or communicate with a rival. And it's, again, possible that birds do it for pleasure, but that's something that's been really difficult to tease apart. So how do we get rid of that function? If you put a male by himself, he's still going to sing because he's probably hoping to find a mate. Good question.
Interesting. Okay, I have lots of questions coming in now. How do the other birds make their noise if not feathers? Do they use their throat?
Yes, so birds have an organ in their throat called the syrinx, which is like our larynx or voice box, but it's a special one that birds have. And they use that. They have muscles that attach to it. And as the air vibrates past it, they can change the vibration to make their different types of sounds.
Very interesting. So that sounds not very different from how we make most of our communication sounds.
Right. It's a little bit different, but it has a lot of similarities.
And we have another question from Roberta Bondar. The grade 3s there are wondering why each bird has a different song.
Okay, well, one important thing is that birds need to be able to recognize members of their own species using their sounds. So if every bird sounded the same, how would a blue jay find another blue jay? And so through changes in songs over time, species that live in the same place tend to get more and more different from one another.
Interesting. It's I find that very interesting that you can see those changes depending on how close the birds are to one another.
Yes.
Next, we have a question from the grade 3-4 class at North Haven. What inspired you to start studying animals and how their senses work?
Well, it was when I was in university. I didn't really know a lot about animals until I took a class in something called behavioral ecology. And then I got really excited, and I got my first real summer job working watching birds called the song sparrow. And they sing about 12 different types of songs. And so I had to sit there in the field and I had to write down what the birds were doing in my notebook. And I found that I really liked doing that and I wanted to do it more. And I became really interested in their songs, which wasn't necessarily what the person I was working with was most familiar with, but she allowed me to work on songs throughout my next couple of years.
Very interesting. Next, we have a question from the grade 4s in Campbellford, Ontario, wondering if you've ever done a life list for birding.
I try my best to keep track of all the birds that I've seen, at least the ones that are in North America, though sometimes I don't have a good way to keep a list of birds I've seen when I've been traveling. But I do keep a list, and I keep a special list that's just for my backyard, called my backyard bird list, of all the birds that we have seen in our backyard.
I think I might have to start that backyard list. I think over time it would be quite interesting. What is the maybe farthest location, if you think of your life list, maybe just in Canada, what is sort of the most remote place that you have found a new bird?
Well, I went to British Columbia recently and I saw a yellow-headed blackbird, which I hadn't seen before.
And we have, what is the common one in Ontario, at least, that people see?
The red-winged blackbird.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And we have Ms. Harold's grade 3s at Auburn Bay wondering, how do you find all these birds when you're out in the field?
Well, birds are actually really easy to find when you start listening and watching. And I'm hoping that some of you will be interested to get out and pay attention more to the sounds that might be in your yard. And once you start to listen, you'll find that even in the city, there's birds everywhere and they're making all kinds of sounds. So all you really have to do is go outside, look for places where there's at least some trees and bushes, and there should be birds there. But in Sault Ste. Marie, we have lots of forests, so there's lots of birds there as well.
We have a question now from Ms. Cant's class at Bogart Public School, asking if birds use these songs to talk to each other, other types of birds, or only birds of their own species.
For the most part, birds communicate with their own species only, although in some cases they might communicate with others as well. So and a good example of that that's not a song is something called the mobbing call. So it's like an alarm call, but birds make it to draw in other birds in order to mob or scare away a predator. And so most species of birds will recognize the chickadee's mobbing call, and they'll all come together to see the predator and try to encourage it to go away and tell it that we've all seen you now, you might as well go somewhere else to look for food.
Interesting. We have a couple questions on bird calls and what other birds sound like. I don't know how easy it is for you to grab sound files. We have a question about a woodpecker call and what eagles sound like. But okay, because we're getting these questions, I think we could probably answer questions like this all day. Is there a good way for classes to find these sounds if they're wondering something later today when the webinar is
right
on?
So what I can do is then share my screen with you right now, and I'll show you the place where I go to listen to bird sounds when I don't know the answer. So this is a page called allaboutbirds.org by Cornell University, which has a big lab of ornithology. And on this, if you search a bird's name, up here at the top, I searched blue jay for you earlier, you'll get all kinds of information about the bird, how to identify it, some things about its life, and then there's sounds that you can play. So you just go to the sound tab, and then you can listen to the different sounds that the birds make. So that's a great resource that you could use at home or maybe in your classrooms to learn a little bit more about birds.
Thank you so much. I think that will be useful so that when students come up with these questions later, they can find the answer themselves. We've got grade 2s from Holy Name in St. Mary's, Ontario, asking, do bird songs change as birds age?
Well, some birds, the answer is no. So they learn their songs when they're young in a specific period when they're about 1 to 2 months old. And then after that, their songs stay pretty much the same. They could get a little better at singing them over that first year, but they don't change. Other birds are able to learn songs throughout their whole lives. So they have repertoires or numbers of different types of songs they sing that will change in their lives. So they can learn new types, perhaps so that they sing the same types as the other birds that are living around them.
And we have a question from the kindergarten class at Griffith Woods wondering, why can't all birds talk?
Well, most birds can make some sort of sounds. So they can, even if they don't make really complex sounds, they can make sounds. At least as far as I know, I can't think of any silent birds. In most cases, the nestlings need to make a call in order to communicate their food need to their parents. And so most birds produce at least some types of sounds.
And we have a specific sound question here from the grade 3s in Mrs. Oliver's class at Dr. Roberta Bondar in Calgary. When a baby bird wants food, what does their call sound like? And I know you had shared that sound with us earlier, but I don't think that was one of the ones that came through well. Perhaps we could revisit that. Sure.
We can do that again.
So a baby bird wanting food.
So that's a little wren that lives in Europe making a begging call. So they all sound a little bit different, but those calls of songbirds all sound very much like that Eurasian wren.
And we have a question here from Ms. Wivdivin. I hope I've said that correctly or close. What is the most interesting bird that you have seen before?
That's a tough question because birds are interesting for different reasons. But I think one of the neatest birds that I saw recently was something called the tui, which is spelled T-U-I, that I listened to and watched in New Zealand. And they're a really neat species of bird that has these really neat feathers. And I'm going to just show you a picture of one quickly here, because I think everybody will like this. Okay, so this is a tui. They've got this little bauble of white feathers on their front. They've got this really colorful, shiny green plumage and this really neat, fluffy looking feathers around their neck. And they sing very long and really complicated songs, and they can sometimes mimic the sounds of other birds as well. And so I went to New Zealand to listen and study bird songs last September, and I think that's one of the most interesting birds that I've seen recently.
And so a related question from Mrs. Oliver's class, what is your favorite bird? Is the tui your favorite, or do you have a different favorite?
That's a hard question. It's one of those ones, is you think my favorite which, you want to answer my favorite songbird or my favorite raptor, because I like so many types of birds. But I think one of my favorites is the black-capped chickadee, because they're a really, really neat bird that stays here all year round. They have many different types of calls as well as their Phoebe song. And I spent 3 years catching and putting little bands on chickadees and then following them around and recording their songs in the forest. And so I learned a lot about chickadees, and I really enjoy them.
And we have another question from St. Patrick here, wondering if the equipment you showed us can make pictures or graphs out of human sounds, or does it only work for bird songs?
Yes, you can make it out of human sounds as well. And I have before been able to, when I've had kids that I'm actually in the classroom, as we're able to make a recording of their sounds in real time. So they can we can plug the microphone into the computer and you can see it. And so human speech is relatively low in frequency, and there's all kinds of complicated patterns or harmonics in our speech. And it looks really neat.
Interesting. I figured you would have probably tried that before. It sounds like something to try with graduate students. Okay, we've got a few questions left here that are sort of specific about birds in Canada. One from Mrs. Oliver's class about what is the rarest bird in Canada. And actually another interesting question from Mrs. Weideven's class. Do birds ever get laryngitis?
Okay, so first, I think one of the rarest birds in Canada is probably the Kirtland's warbler, although I'm not sure if it's the rarest. We do have some in Ontario. They're associated with these jack pine trees that require fire to regenerate, so it's an ecosystem that's often hard to maintain. And so there aren't very many Kirtland's warblers. And then I've never noticed a bird and thought that bird has laryngitis or syrinxitis, as you might call it, because their sound organ is called the syrinx. But I would suspect, like an anatomical part of any animal or human, there's probably diseases that can affect it. So I suspect that it's possible. Although a silent bird would be harder to see and find, so it would be difficult to tell. So I'm not 100% positive of my answer, but my suspicion is yes.
That makes sense. We don't have all the answers yet, so
No.
Of course we wouldn't necessarily know for certain. I do want to wrap things up, as I know a bunch of our classes will be perhaps headed to lunch. One last question about what it's like to be a researcher doing what you're doing. Any advice you might have for students who may wish to pursue something similar with field work like you?
Okay, well, it's a wonderful job. I get to inspire young students, and I get to learn lots of new things myself all of the time. And I think that the best thing you could do if you want to do something like this is just spend time watching what's happening around you and making just observations or keeping a notebook. Because it's from these that we get the hypotheses that we later test to try to figure things out. So it all starts with observations, which are things that anybody can make, including children.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today to show us such wonderful pictures and sounds and to answer all of our student questions today, Dr. Foote. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for listening, everyone.
And next week on PIR Live Event, we have two webinars coming your way. We're learning about food waste and Turtle Island conservation and how that ties in with First Nations ways of knowing. So you can find out more information about these webinars and other upcoming webinars and educational programs at pirweb.org. Thanks so much for joining us today, and have a great week, everyone.